going to conquer, and we're going to take some. Is that understood? Yes, sir. That's what we're going to do, sweethearts. We are going to go and get some. All right, people, on the ready line. Are you me? Yeah! Are you me? Yeah! What are you?
Exceptional Parent Magazine's August back-to-school issue provides tips on preparing students with disabilities for an easier transition from summer vacation back to school. You can read this issue and past archive issues for free by signing up for EP at www.epmagazine.com.
Monotony. It comes in all shapes and sizes. Dull, tedious, just plain boring. But what is this? A contender, perhaps? Something unboring by the looks of it. Jabs right at dull, an uppercut to tedium, something that keeps you on your toes, keeps your head on a swivel, a knockout punch to your old, boring workouts. Welcome to Fight Camp.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of Reach Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every wreath you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Marines are made for this. Made for the calling only warriors can answer. Made from an unshakable belief in our nation and a strength that comes from the determination to win together. But you'll have to earn your place among us, because you don't join the Marines. You become one.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio as we count down to number 500. My name is Travis, Marine Corps veteran and your host. Oscar Mike Radio is co-produced with Sinister One Productions. What's your podcast doing? I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asack of Asack Real Estate and Echo 6 Creations, and my supporters, Cason Shaving Company, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and Fight Camp. Be your strongest combination. We're rolling through here. Yes, we are counting down to number 500, and I've got another author here with a really cool, interesting story. We met about 8 months ago, so I'm going to let him get into all of that. He is Eric Hummel, submariner and Air Force veteran who's served in many different ways and has written the book, The Losing Game, How to Lose War and Fail Veterans. Eric, welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Travis. Yeah, you can tell by that title, it's a love story.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be any other way, and I'm glad we get, something other than, yay America, which I'm all about being an American, yay, but this is a different kind of story. We met at Military Creator Con in Orlando, Florida last January, and got to talking, and you presented about your book and your story, and you do all kinds of cool stuff. And we'll try to get into all that. But, You have a very interesting military story too, Eric. So I want to know if you'd start there for me.
Well, yeah, it's convoluted. Basically, what it comes down to, just in a real quick nutshell, enlisted Navy, submarine guy, Cold War, finished up an enlistment. Turned out I really didn't like living in a tube with 100 other dudes. All right. I mean, for some, it's awesome. Glad I served, but time to move on. Stayed in Navy Reserve, was a Seabee for a while, so I got to play with your brethren in the Marine Corps and then made the decision. Actually, was a former soldier who convinced me to join the Air Force. He said the magic words. You ever see the way those guys live? And so, yeah. So at that point, I was in grad school, had to make some changes in my life, still in the Navy Reserve. So I had about 9 years of active and reserve time in the enlisted Navy when I got my commission in the Air Force. In the Air Force, bounced around 16 years total in the officer corps with 9 different AFSCs. That's the equivalent of an MOS. So I couldn't hold a job. And in between tour in Iraq, tour in Afghanistan, tried to avoid the Army, but both of those tours were with the Army, and also spent 3 years up on Capitol Hill as a legislative liaison. And so got to see, in particular, the war in Afghanistan from a NATO perspective, because I supported the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So got to see that from a political perspective before I actually deployed to Afghanistan, which was, from my perspective, a huge force multiplier. After retiring in 2011, spent the next decade training government officials to deploy to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, mostly as advisors. So working in their respective ministries of defense and Ministry of Interior. Interior would be like the police forces. And when everything went sideways in August 2021 with Afghanistan, I worked with the Afghan refugees coming into the United States for a little less than a year. And then after that, Travis, I was done. And we can pick it up from there.
Well, sure. I mean, because when I met you, you kind of went over the spiel, and I'm like, because my first thought was, what's the Air Force truly know about what happened on the ground in Afghanistan? It's a very, you know, not easy, but you can see where I would come to that conclusion quickly. And then you started going into what you actually did. And I'm like, all right, we might actually have a different perspective here. And then I read your book, and it's like, wait a minute, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz when you see the curtain pulled away and the truth right there. Because I've never understood why we lost in the first place. I mean, we had seen what the Russians did, we had seen what other countries had done, like the French, and I thought we're not going to repeat the same things. But we not only did we repeat it, we did it at a larger scale. So I was very interested to talk with you. And now I see this video. They're Brits in Afghanistan, and they go to this store where it's like an army surplus store of all our stuff, and not like you go to the army surplus here and it's like the old cheap stuff that's not being sold for cheap, but it's like the top of the line gear and you can just buy it off the shelf. I'm like, what did we do? So I was very interested to meet with you. It took a while, but okay, we're here now. You did a very compelling, talk in Orlando about your story. And I guess I'll start with the way it picked up. Like, what prompted you after all this to say, you know what, I'm gonna write a book about it? Where did that seed germinate?
Yeah, well, thank you for that intro. I never intended to write a book. That's the
Okay.
thing. I tell you, I just got angry. I got really angry, having been involved in Afghanistan in some way, shape, or form since really 2006, when I started supporting NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Congress, and then again, pretty much working straight through in Afghanistan until 2021. When the Afghanistan Papers, a book by Washington Post reporter Craig Whitlock, came out in December of 2019. And he basically exposed that senior leadership was lying, and that we were losing. Okay. And when that came out, when that was published, and again, it didn't last long in the media because that was December 2019, and what happened right after that was COVID. So senior leadership got very lucky because they could hide, and those who actually responded in editorial form deflected. Not my fault. I knew, to your point about, seeing American goods in, shops in Afghanistan and, going back to kind of Vietnam style of warfare where we're looking at numbers or as we call it, metrics. But Craig Whitlock basically said, okay, from all the reports that he's looking at, that senior leadership was losing and lying. His quote, "We are at war with the truth." That didn't make me angry. I knew that, okay, because I'd
Okay.
been involved for so many years. Again, what made me angry were the responses, okay? And when I took off my enlisted uniform, put on an officer's uniform, one thing that was driven into me constantly was that officers take responsibility. And I didn't see one officer take responsibility. And so I started writing an editorial and I just lost my mind and turned into a book. So I never intended to write a book, but that's how it came about. And my book is really written for the veteran. So many of our veterans, they knew their jobs. When they deployed, whether it be to Afghanistan or Iraq, they knew their jobs, but I would guarantee you the majority of them did not know the overarching mission. They did not know the why behind this. And so I set out to try to explain the why. And also, in doing that, I had to explain, who I am, why this little Air Force freak is qualified, to write this type of book. So I had to start from the beginning and pretty much expose a lot of my warts in the progress.
It was interesting as I read your book, the parallels between your book and the book by Stuart Scheller, the Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, who, in his own words, kind of lost it when the evacuation, and he got, similarly kicked out of the Marine Corps, damn near court-martialed and everything. The parallels were pretty eerie, Eric. I'm not going to. It's almost like I'm reading the same book by two different perspectives, and I did wonder why our officers were not being honest with the American people or their, you know, soldiers and Marines about what was going on. And that's really bothered me. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, of course, I can only speculate about other officers.
Well, just in your own, yeah.
Yeah. And so, what I'm just going to boil it down to is careerism. We are now a professional military where when you become an officer, when you get that commission, that is now your career. And if you're in a career, you want to preserve your career. And so you're going to do what you're told to do. You're going to follow the rules, right? I mean, the title of my book is The Losing Game, right? And I
Yep.
frame it all around a game. And a career is like playing a game. Okay, what are the rules? All right. So in order to advance, in order to get the positions that I need to get, in order to retire at 20 to 30 years, I need to do certain things. And the easiest way to do that is not upset the apple cart because we see what happens to people who upset the apple cart. So you salute smartly and you motor on.
Some of the pieces are people's lives and, our country's outlook and future as a whole, right? So, how can you disassociate that with your own career? Is your career that? I mean, yes, my career is valuable to me. Absolutely, it's a very generic statement to make, but it's not just about that because I look at it as an officer is saying to his troops, "Hey, I know that I can order you to your death, but I'm going to do everything I can to either A, make your lives worth it, or avoid having to spend 1 ounce of your blood." But it doesn't seem that way reading your book.
There's certainly good officers out there,
Okay.
right? And so, I'm not disparaging, my brethren, but there are certainly those, to Craig Whitlock's point, who were lying, plain and simple. And so when you're lying about, we use metrics as an example, right? The numbers. And so, we use dollars. And let me clarify that a big part of my book focuses on the counterinsurgency portion of the mission, not the counterterrorism portion of the mission. Okay. So counterterrorism is more, kill people and break their things, kill the bad guys. Okay. In Afghanistan, we had the counterterrorism, counterinsurgency. So I'm focusing more on the counterinsurgency. All right. And so that part of the mission is about building a strong, stable, secure Afghanistan able to stand on its own. Okay. So basically, what we're doing is we're trying to wrap our arms around the Afghans and get them to a point where they can take care of themselves and defend themselves. Okay. The counterterrorism portion of the mission is to disrupt, dismantle, defeat Al Qaeda and its affiliates. Now they intertwine. Okay. But the counterinsurgency part of it is to make sure that the bad guys don't come back to power. And it's difficult. And it takes time and it takes effort and it takes relationships. And it was those types of things that we weren't able to invest in because we wanted it all done yesterday. And we have a leadership mindset, or I should say a military mindset, where we still believe that we can kill the bad guy and achieve victory. In some cases, that's true, but not in a place like Afghanistan.
Well, I was going to say, you're talking about a place that's been around for thousands of years, the tribal fuel system for thousands of years. And I'm not as versed in it as you are or other people, but I'm like, how are you going to reverse thousands of years of ingrained culture in less than 10?
Yeah, it's impossible. It's
Okay.
impossible. Yeah. So just to kind of further define what an insurgency is.
All right.
So we have a, in quotes, legitimate government that we're supporting. Okay. And that would be the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, shortened JAROA. Okay. We helped install their president, first Hamid Karzai and then Ashraf Ghani. We helped write their constitution. We helped set up their bureaucracy, all their ministries. Okay. And now we're saying time to shift from kind of that tribal mindset. And keep in mind, these are Afghans who were actually doing pretty well back in the 60s. And then when the 70s, late 70s rolled around and the Soviets got involved in Afghanistan, that's when things really kind of devolved. And now you have Afghans not only fighting against the Soviets, but when the Soviets leave after 10 years, the Afghans start fighting each other because there's a vacuum of power. And it just regresses, regresses, regresses. You take something as simple as education. I say simple, it's actually very complex. We take education or formalized education in this country for granted. It's just something that is. In a place like Afghanistan, with all the warfare over the years, education goes away, all right, because you are focused on survival. And so now we're rolling in there with Western bureaucratic, perspective, saying you're going to be like us. That's how we're going to counter the bad guys, all right? It doesn't, to your point, it doesn't take 10 years. At best, if you do it right from the beginning, it takes about one generation, and that's about 30 years. Because all the old guys have to go away. All those warlords, they have to disappear because they're not about to give up their power. And so when we go in there with this American mindset of we're going to plant the flag and say mission accomplished, okay, good luck, but it ain't over.
One thing that's always bothered me is how the Taliban were able to just almost flip a switch and completely take over again. And your book kind of goes into that, but for our watchers and listeners, it just seemed like even after I read it, and I read it in several different places how they did it, it still boggles my mind. Either we were very blind to the situation, or we did not understand our enemy. And I can't get around that part of it, Eric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understanding the enemy. So, and the enemy it's complex in a place like Afghanistan, and I think I need to just kind of back up a little bit and kind
Okay.
of give your listeners and viewers kind of an idea of kind of how I got into all this. Again, being an Air Force guy, right? Because I'm sure that your listeners and your viewers are like, okay, Zumi, what do you know about this stuff? So as I mentioned, spent 3 years again supporting NATO Parliamentary Assembly when I was a legislative liaison to Congress. And so each branch of the services have a small group of folks who are working on Capitol Hill with the 435 members. Okay. So part of my responsibilities was working with NATO PA. Again, got to see Afghanistan from a NATO perspective. And remember, Afghanistan was a NATO mission. An attack on one, September 11th, attack on us was an attack on all. So we now come together in that coalition. So I had the luxury of traveling with members of Congress and going to meetings with gentlemen like General David Petraeus, right? I'm fly on the wall. I'm sitting in meetings with the ambassador to Afghanistan. I got to meet Afghan government officials, right? And so we're doing what's called congressional delegations traveling to Afghanistan, also Iraq and other places. So that's when I get to see it, firsthand. And I realized along the way that what was being said in Kabul, right, by the people in charge, compared to what was being said out in the field, because typically you'd always go out to the field on these congressional delegations and you'd meet with the troops. I actually did one GovDel with three governors, governor from Rhode Island, South Dakota, and Colorado. And so we got to meet with their federalized guard troops who were there. And to hear them tell a different story than what leadership was talking about in Kabul. In Kabul, we were winning the war. Out in the field, there were a lot of questions about how we were winning the war. And so it just inspired me to volunteer to become what's called a provincial reconstruction team commander. And as a provincial reconstruction team commander, you have three basic responsibilities. So you're going to go to a province, one of 34 provinces, like a state in Afghanistan. And your responsibilities are reconstruction, security, and governance. Okay? Again, this is the counterinsurgency part of the mission. Typically, you're teamed up with a maneuver unit, okay, who's going to focus on fighting the bad guys. You'll work hand in hand. In my particular case, I was both. So I was sent to a province called Panjshir. This happened to be the last province to hold out against the Taliban back in 2021. And so I was the FOB, the Forward Operating Base owner, and my security force was about 75 Mujahideen. Okay, and then on my team, I had a combination of engineers, comm guys, intel. I had a squad of Army MP folks, a couple of civilian law enforcement professionals, and so on. Also teamed with State Department, Department of Agriculture, Department of Justice, and a number of other agencies as well. Okay, so we're basically out there doing our own thing. And that's how I got really familiar with Afghanistan. Of course, I did some studying beforehand before getting command and all that. And so I was an Air Force guy in an Army position. I reported to 82nd Airborne. Okay, so they were my division commander. And so here's this Air Force guy now playing Army. And I also played a little Army in Iraq as well. So because of that situation, my 3 years prior, my year as a provincial reconstruction team commander / ground battle space commander, I got to live it and I got to make it up as I went along. Okay. And we can talk more about that if you're interested.
Well, I am interested because I've always tried to understand what the prototypical Afghani is like. Did they really want freedom? Did they really embrace something newer or better? Or were they just biding their time, waiting us out all along? What was that like, doing that job and working with the Afghani people?
Yeah, so the Afghans are complex society, all right,
Okay.
because you have to remember that they didn't form their own country, right? That country was formed by Great Britain, part of what was called the Great Game, and the power between India and what's currently Pakistan and what's currently Afghanistan. And so you have two separate and distinct languages in the country. You have Dari and Pashto. Dari is spoken mostly up north, and then of course there are subdialects galore. So Dari is spoken mostly up north in Afghanistan, Pashto down south. So you have the Pashtuns that speak Pashto, and up north you have a combination of different types of ethnicities, from Uzbeks to Tajiks. You have a smattering of course, Pakistanis in there. You have a smattering of Hazara, and different religions. Also, you have Sunni and Shia Muslims in Afghanistan. So the typical Afghan, there isn't, to answer your question or to try to answer your question. And so that's why it's so important when you go into a place like Afghanistan, you understand who and what you're dealing with, and you're taking time to understand the situation. Because if you don't understand the situation, then you're set up from failure from day one. And so that's why I know you're a Marine, and the Marine, their mindset is adapt and overcome. Okay. Whereas the Army likes to shape the environment. A little different, right? And
Yep.
so a place like Afghanistan, I think the Marine mindset is a little bit more, applicable. You have to understand what you're getting into. You have to understand the people that you are dealing with. Okay, this is a high context society. And so it's a society where relationships matter. You have to take the time to get to know the people. Okay, and you have to be honest. Okay, they are experts. It's broad brush now. Okay. Again, to define an individual Afghan as this, that, and the other thing, I'd be lying to you. But broad brush, they are experts at reading you,
Hmm.
all of them, because they're all survivors. Okay, they've all survived warfare. Okay, so they know who the enemy is. They're going to find out within a minute, because it may be an issue of life or death. So if you go in there with a typical kind of hubristic American attitude, okay, that's nice. They'll play with that. Okay, and they know how to. Doesn't mean that they're going to play against you. They just know how to play with it. But if you go in there trying to build relationships, and during my training phase, when I would train government officials for a decade, we focused a lot on respect, empathy, humility, and accountability. Okay, I'm training Americans, senior government officials, to be respectful, empathetic, humble, and accountable. What a weird way to fight a war, isn't it?
Very bass ackards, as my grandpa used to say.
And it's just to survive and be able to function in that type of environment, you have to have those attributes. Okay.
Well, so I've read Bernard Fall Street Without Joy about Vietnam and several Vietnam books, and it's almost like we're fighting a different terrain, topology, so on and so forth, but we didn't really apply the lessons we didn't learn in Vietnam here either. It doesn't seem that way. Like we were told, the Russians built relationships with the North Vietnamese, told them what they didn't lie to them, and we just went in there with American know-how, napalm, and we got what we got.
I'm sure you could draw a lot of parallels between Afghanistan and Vietnam. And we actually had units similar to PRTs in Vietnam, Cords and CAP. And a lot of those were actually Marines, out working with the locals, right? Building those relationships, having them defend themselves. That was more about, kind of a counter North Vietnamese strategy, not so much counter insurgency. A little bit of that mixed in. That was more kind of on the military side. Okay. But in my particular case, when you're trying to build a government, when you're trying to build the security apparatus, and when you're trying to do reconstruction, or many times construction in Afghanistan, um, and you're trying to make sure that your Afghan partners are doing it, okay, that's when it gets really difficult, especially similar to Vietnam, when metrics or numbers get involved. Remember, in Vietnam, the big thing was body count,
Yep.
right? The more we kill of them, and there was a ratio. McNamara and his whiz kids had a ratio of how many North Vietnamese we could kill in relation to how many Americans die, and that determines how we win. Okay, metrics. Afghanistan, the metric was the way I, summarized in the book was dollars to kilometers. We spend X amount of dollars, we get X amount of kilometers of road, right? That shows progress, right? We build schools, we build clinics. Oh, but Travis, here's part of the problem. We don't build doctors and nurses to fill the clinics. We don't build teachers or administrators to fill the schools. And we don't build public works professionals who are able to take care of the roads after we build them. And so on paper, it looks great. Okay. In reality, we're getting pretty much next to nothing, as far as bang to the buck.
How were the Taliban then able to wait us out and then just snap their fingers, and it seemed like they took right back over? And at least from where I was sitting, some of the Afghan people welcomed them back with open arms. That was the strangest thing to see.
Sure. So again, keep in mind, these are not stupid people, especially when it comes to warfare, right? So they know how to win a war. They've studied us, right? They've studied the Soviets. They know our tactics and our procedures. And so they knew they could just wait us out. They knew the Taliban saw the corruption that was taking place in the, quote unquote, legitimate government. And they knew that the government was built on a foundation of sand, right? Instability. And they just had to wait. And then slowly they just chipped away, chipped away, chipped away. And so when one district had some issues, then they would move in, take control. Okay. And keep in mind, the Taliban, the one thing that they're really good at is law and order. Really good. That's what got them, basically in the position they were in prior to September 11th. And so, you may not like them, okay, but they may be just a little bit more honest than the, again, quote unquote, legitimate government of Afghanistan. And so, yeah, they were smart enough to wait out their enemy. And then slowly but slowly, they started taking over. And it was funny to see, again, talking about metrics, how when the Taliban started moving closer and closer to the large city centers like Kabul, we stopped reporting the numbers of Afghan controlled spaces, of government of Afghanistan controlled spaces, right? Because those numbers weren't palatable. They just went away. Okay. And so if you don't talk about it, if you don't see it, then it doesn't exist. So yeah, to try to answer your question again, they were smart. And at this point, if you're stuck in Afghanistan, and keep in mind, a lot of the Afghans who supported us did not get out of Afghanistan, you don't have a choice. You better welcome them.
Well, so let's go back to about the legitimate government problems. One thing that really uh, made me angry was watching Karzai take our assistance, take our money, and then, let American lives be spent on his country. And then the first chance he got, he left. And then, you know, told, news outlets that, the Americans didn't fight hard enough for his country. And I'm like, we were never going to win if that's the best we could do for a leader in Afghanistan during that time. Was I right or wrong thinking that way, Eric?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding. No, you're
Well,
certain.
well, some people defend him.
Okay. It's funny. So my governor in Panjshir hated Karzai. He would not call him the president. He always referred to him as the waiter because Karzai and his family owned a restaurant or a couple of restaurants in the Baltimore area. Okay. So again, here you have, what many people believe to be a puppet of the United States who was installed through, again, in quotes, a legitimate election. Um, and, again, not stupid. He realized that America, the way that we, again, prosecute war now is we throw money at a problem, and he's going to take advantage of that, he and his family. And don't forget that his family got very wealthy off of this war as well. And so, of course, he's going to deflect. So, if something goes wrong, he's got to survive himself as well. So if the United States makes a mistake and kills innocent Afghan civilians, of course he's going to lash out at the United States and talk about how terrible we are. He's saving himself in the process while still getting paid. So, no, you're not wrong. And it was bound to fail.
So, what's happening to you as you see both sides of the coin? Your boots on the ground, and even though you're an Air Force guy, your boots on the ground, you're talking with these people, you're sitting in on their times when they have tea with other people listening to this. You had to change inside, Eric.
Well, my changing inside, that happened a long time ago, brother. You know, uh, I was familiar with military leadership, right? Because when I got to Afghanistan, I had about 23 years of time in the military between um, active and reserve Navy and then active Air Force. And so I was already changed in that, again, I knew that we were losing and I knew that we were lying when I showed up in Afghanistan. And keep in mind, I volunteered for this. I also knew that when I was going to come back from Afghanistan, that I would soon retire thereafter. So this was really kind of my swan song in the military. So, so nothing changed when I got there. I was already changed. And I had my own perspective coming into it. I was going to do what I wanted to do. Now, my command didn't exactly like that. And just to give you an example, so I mentioned the dollars to kilometers,
Yep.
the construction of the roads in Afghanistan. And again, this is how we're basically reporting back to Congress saying we are successful. And when I got to Panjshir, I noticed that a lot of homes that lined the main valley road, and keep in mind, we're up in the Hindu Kush Mountains, so everything is very tight, right? Any type of, flat or arable land is already in use. And we are now building this road to American specs. So in some cases, it's only 3 meters wide, existing, kind of like a dirt Jeep trail. And now we're expanding it to 10 meters wide. 7 meters of asphalt, meter and a half of soft shoulder on each side. And so when you expand like that, you have to take people's property. All right. So in America, we call that eminent domain. Right.
Yep.
And whenever you take somebody's property, you have to compensate them. It's the law. And so when I showed up, I saw these busted down houses and everything. And I honestly, my first thought was, and what I asked was, oh my God, when did the battle happen? How come I didn't hear about it? Right. And it's like, oh, no, 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 this is just construction, just building the road. And so I have a little academic background in city and regional planning. And so my question was, um, okay, so the people are being compensated. And the answer was, I don't think so. And this is from the Americans. I don't think so. Okay. And then that was in my pre-deployment site survey. And so I already formed in my mind before going over there that we're going to get these people compensated because I looked at the Afghan constitution. Lo and behold, property is immune from invasion. It cannot be seized without proper compensation. We wrote or helped to write the Afghan constitution. And one of my lines of effort is the rule of law, and we're violating it willingly. And just think about that for a second, Travis. Okay, so you're up in Massachusetts, right?
Yep.
Okay, state of Massachusetts knocks on your door. It says, Travis, we're going to build a road through your front yard. Okay. Get out. Just get out. And of course, you're going to ask, well, you can't do that. You have to compensate me, right? There's a process. No, just leave. Okay, this is how we are winning, or we're winning, in quotes, the war in Afghanistan. How would you feel if the state of Massachusetts told you to get out of your house, zero compensation?
Well, I wouldn't look at you as my saviors, and I would sit there and say, well, the Taliban can't be that bad after all. I mean, look at what these guys are doing.
Thank you. Okay, but that's what we were doing. And so when I stopped work on the roads, okay, my command, my Army command lost their minds. All right, because I am slowing down progress. Right. And I said, no, Progress is getting these people compensated for the taking of their property, right? I mean, they sent in a helicopter package to Panjshir, picked me up. I took my Army First Sergeant with me back to Bagram, where they threatened me. Okay, and had guys in the room with stars, eagles, lawyers, Army Corps of Engineers, and yeah, they flat out threatened me, basically saying you don't have the authority to do this. And I said, I believe I do. It's called the law, and one of our lines of effort is rule of law, right? And then it got down to the point where they basically threatened me with a bad promotion evaluation. And Travis, I couldn't care less because I was going back home and retiring from there. And also, what they didn't realize is that I had friends back in Congress. Okay. I knew the president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And so, if anything got super stupid, then really I felt that I could just make one phone call. And so I didn't acquiesce to their threats. And actually, I left that meeting feeling even more engaged. And when all was said and done, this was difficult because we then took the Afghans and they led the way. All right. The responsible parties, the governor, the sub-governors, okay, the ministries of social services and others, and chiefs of police, they all got involved in doing damage assessment surveys and working with the contractors, the road contractors, to compensate the people. So the American taxpayer didn't pay any more money in this, and the government actually did their jobs. Okay. Now, did it take longer to build the road? It did. But I would argue that the governance portion of my mission was somewhat accomplished. Okay. But keep that in mind that I accomplished or came close to accomplishing the governance portion and the rule of law portion of my mission, and yet I was getting threatened.
At that point, you didn't care, but you can't be the only one that had those, you know, what's the West Point saying? Do the harder right versus the easier wrong, I believe is what the term is.
I don't know what they say in West Point because I went to an art college.
Well, it's something I've heard a lot.
Yeah.
Do the harder right versus the easier wrong, and this is the kind of stuff I'm trying to learn about because I'm like, there's a time where we looked at ways to win wars, but we were also told, hey, we're bombing the mess out of these people. I mean, there's no way they have the will to resist us, and that wasn't exactly true either. And it really, I mean, were we trying to win militarily as well? Because I just can't get over. This is maybe a little off topic here, Eric, but I'm like, we can pinpoint anywhere, and we could not get goat herders and sheep herders out of the caves and mountains that had, World War II weaponry. Like, what happened there?
So you bring up a very good point about winning wars. All right. And that's something that I try to explain and outline in the book because I think a lot of people who are in the business of warfare truly don't understand how to win wars. And to win a war, you have to secure the peace. Okay. So the end stage of warfare is transition, giving it back to the rightful owner as allies. And just to give you an example of that, I'll ask you a question, Travis. Did we win World War One?
I don't think so,
Why?
because even though we stopped Hitler, we didn't stop him.
So World War One, right? So World War One, we technically won, okay, but it gave rise to Hitler.
Yes, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, Hitler was served in World War One, excuse me.
Yeah, so World War One, okay, but it gave rise to Hitler because we didn't secure the peace.
Correct.
Okay, after World War II, I'd argue we won World War II because we were able to secure the peace. Little thing called the Marshall Plan.
Yep.
So, Chief of Staff of the Army, General George C. Marshall, right, who is really the architect of the of World War II. So he was Eisenhower's boss in Europe and MacArthur's boss out in the Pacific. Okay, he understood full spectrum warfare. So he understood that once you defeat the bad guy, and they sign, the armistice or the treaty, it's not over. Okay, and so Marshall Plan Not only, we think about Marshall Plan in Europe, we say, oh, he rebuilt Europe. That plan rebuilt Europe. And what it did was it rebuilt the economy. It rebuilt the bureaucracy. Okay. It kept the Soviet Union at bay,
Yep.
right? Okay. And it secured the peace. By the way, Marshall Plan also created NATO. Okay. Helped secure the peace. Travis, that is the hard part of warfare. Killing people and breaking their things, relatively simple, and man, we are good at it. The best the world has ever seen. But it's securing the peace that's hard because we don't practice that.
Is that why too? Once we had Japan sign the treaty, we helped helped rebuild Japan, and it was seen, it was kind of like really weird. I remember reading newspaper articles like, why are we doing this? And then years later, it wasn't another new enemy to fight. They were at peace with us. They were an ally. Is that the reasoning behind that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, though, there were a number of people who were against all of that at the time, right? How can we do something nice for the enemies? We should punish them. If you think about just the history of warfare, most of the times after you defeat your enemy, you do just that. You punish them. You enslave them. You take their material wealth, right? You take their land. Okay. If you go back to Lincoln, right? His second inaugural address towards the end of the war in 1865, he starts his last paragraph with malice towards none and charity to all. What he's telling the country is when this war ends, we are not going to punish, right? We're going to bring the South back into the fold. Reconciliation, repatriation, reconstruction. Okay. That was unheard of at the time, right? George C. Marshall understood that. We are not going to punish. And so, in a place like Afghanistan, again, so the Taliban's bad because they allowed bin Laden to operate from their territory and then they wouldn't give him up. Okay, got it. Now we're going to go after you. We're going to go after bin Laden, all justified. Okay, but now what? Tell me how the story ends. Okay, give me the mission. And I go back to the Afghanistan Papers, that book by Craig Whitlock, and he makes it clear in the book that senior leadership, all the way up through the White House during numerous administrations, could not define the mission. Okay? I'm sorry, but that's why you get paid the big bucks. You have to define the mission, even if it hurts. And what I mean by even if it hurts is, can you imagine President George W. Bush addressing the American people early on in the war and say, um, mission is not accomplished. This is going to take 30 years, America, to make sure that Afghanistan will become United States ally. And it's an important ally because just look at the map. It's surrounded by Iran on one side, Pakistan on the other side, all of these other stands on top of it with a little sliver of China. It's an important location. And that's where obviously terrorism breeds. Are you with me, America? 30 years.
Automatic no, like
There you go. Okay. So we're lacking a strategic mindset, I would argue, right? Everything has to be for a soundbite today, right?
well,
And we lack this vision.
just educate me here. What if we had just gotten bin Laden, took him out, and said, mission over, we're done, we're pulling out, we've accomplished the mission, and left it alone? Was that ever an option realistically, or was that just wishful thinking?
If that was the mission, you define it as such, you accomplish it, okay, game over.
Yeah.
Right? But we had this perspective that we could build, these bright shining stars, in Central Asia, and then of course in Iraq, so Middle East. And when you have that vision without the ability to accomplish it, and at the same time incentivizing the wrong things, okay? Again, like spending money, It's not about spending money. It's actually just the opposite. If you can accomplish governance, security, and to some degree reconstruction without spending much money, meaning that the rightful owners are doing it, right? In places like Iraq and Afghanistan, that's how you accomplish victory, or one aspect of it, because the people are doing the work in partnership, right? Maybe with mentorship from their partners, and that would be us. And that's where the relationships come into play. I've heard it say, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care, especially in those places in the world.
You do the book, you publish it. What was the initial reaction, or what were you hoping people would get out of it when they read it?
So I wrote it primarily, again, for the veteran, because I know there are a lot of vets out there who are still suffering in a big way. And I know a portion of that suffering is them, again, not understanding what they did and why they did it. Their leadership never explained it to them. And so when something traumatic happens in that type of scenario, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life, how do you make sense of what oftentimes seems to be senseless? And so my hope is that by trying to explain this, by trying to explain the mission, by trying to explain the five phases of warfare, right? And it coming from a guy who I'd like to think, even though I was part of an institution, that I was non-institutionalized, okay? Again, because my background, I never planned any of this. Again, I have an art degree, right? And I went to an art high school as well. And I lived under the water. Okay. So none of this was ever on my menu. And just my good fortune, my happenstance, whatever you want to call it, I think I have a perspective that, well, I know that nobody else has. And I want to be able to share that with the veteran. And so hopefully in some way, shape, or form, that not only could they understand it, but also get a little bit of catharsis in knowing that what they did was exactly what they were supposed to do because that's what they were told to do. And the blame, the fault in losing these wars rests with guys like me, guys in leadership positions. And so I also want to take responsibility for my failures.
But you're owning the failure now. I guess my last couple of questions would be around is you understand that you perceive that you have failed, which I wouldn't say you have, because you're one of the few officers who actually, like, Lieutenant Colonel Scheller actually said, hey, you know what, we've messed up. But like him, I would ask, what can we do to change this so we can be more like Marshall and win and stay winning?
Wow, it's $1 million question right there, right? What can we do? It's a change in corporate culture, just to kind of speak generically.
Sure.
When we are incentivizing losing, and we are, okay, you take a look at those who were in charge over the past 20 years, and now they're all multimillionaires, okay? So we've incentivized losing, okay? If that is the corporate culture that we are now saying works in some way, shape, or form, then nothing's going to change, right? And so I'm not saying burn it down. I'm saying get back to the core values of what it means to be an officer. Start taking responsibility. Again, this is, and I'm not bragging here, but my book is the only book that takes responsibility for failure. That's insane. We lost these last two wars.
What's next for you now that you've written the book? Do you feel a need to follow up with it? Do you want leadership now to make changes? What are you trying to do now?
So, best case scenario, of course, leadership makes changes. This book isn't going to inspire them to change. Again, there's too much perverse incentive for them to kind of stick with the plan. God, that's a nice thought. No, my objective with the book, again, is to have the veterans, again, just understand what they've been through and that they matter. They mattered then during that time period, and they matter now, and they matter forever. I'm out of the game
Yeah.
at this point. I give tours of Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah, I want to come down there with my rig and walk through and see that with you. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that, sir.
Yeah, so that's another one of my weird twists in my career is that I was once the officer in charge for Air Force ceremonies, so I was responsible for high-level funerals at Arlington, and I fell in love with the place, and so that's what I do now. Again, I'm sorry to say it, but I no longer want to play on a losing team,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I've tapped out.
How can people connect with you, your book, and your work with the Arlington Cemetery?
So if you want to take a tour of Arlington with me, and again, one of the reasons why I started doing that business was really to engage with veterans. I want to give them an opportunity to meet me, walk with me, talk with me through the cemetery, um, share some stories. My tours are small. I max out at 12, and I have a special rate for veterans as well. My tours are long. They're at least 3 hours. Oftentimes they go 4. I did one the other day that went 6 hours. So get ready to stand on your feet, Travis. Um, and so I really just want to meet and engage with vets and talk quite a bit. And you can find me there at vigilancetours.com, VIGILANCETOURS.com. Right. And if you want to reach out to me concerning the book or chat with me, you can reach me at lion6press.com. That's lionsixpress.com.
Well, I will have all those links in the Oscar Mike Rio show post. I really appreciate the signed copy you gave me in Florida. I started reading it back on the plane going home and really kind of thought about the Vietnam War, and what we have and have not been able to do. And I appreciate your candor, sir. I do.
Yeah, thank you. Just one final thought.
Sure.
If we don't learn from this, we will repeat it.
Absolutely.
100%. We will repeat it. May not be, in my lifetime, but we have to watch out for our children and our grandchildren. Again, because, oh, actually, you being a Marine, are you familiar with this book?
Yes, I am. And I'm told I'm a traitor for reading it, but I'm like, it was a real eye opener because he was considered, in boot camp, we learn about him.
Mhm.
They never mentioned that part of him.
Yeah.
And then I
Medal
found
of
out
Honor
why.
recipient.
War is a
Writing about
racket.
war is a racket. That's exactly right. Yeah. A lot of money is made off of having bad men out there,
Yep.
right? And so another thing we need to be aware of, something that Eisenhower warned us about when he left office back in 61 about the military industrial complex. And we don't win wars with tanks, bombs, and airplanes. We win wars by securing the peace.
Yep. Yep. Well, Eric, thank you so much for spending time talking with me. I look forward to seeing you in person soon when I get down to DC and check out that tour, and then we'll talk again. But I really appreciate your wit, your candor, and just laying this out for me so I can understand the gaps in what I read. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Travis. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity. Also, I failed to mention, of course, the book is available on Amazon. Just type in The Losing Game, How to Lose a War and Fail Veterans, or my last name, Hommel, Hommel.
I will have that link in the Oscar Mike Radio show post. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here. Go check out the book and get a different perspective on what we are doing as Americans. And Eric, thank you again.
All right. Thank you, brother.
We are Mission Flight. We'll see you next time. Take care.
The biggest fear Gold Star families have that their child will be forgotten.
We need to never forget freedom wasn't free.
It's the fact that they give us the life we have now. We should remember them and give thanks to them.
If I can be a part of something today that's going to make the surviving family of any of these veterans, these heroes, feel better tomorrow, then it's worth it.
That one wreath symbolizes one family that was able to smile because of the generous donations.
To sponsor a wreath and honor a veteran, visit wreathsacrossamerica.org.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.